Christmas Rathri, which means the Christmas night. On Christmas Day, George and his wife Ani are at church attending the Holy Mass. They step outside, and George realizes that his driver is missing. He then sets out to search for him. Meanwhile, Ani overhears two women talking about her and George. They were gossiping that Ani has not had any children after 6 years of marriage due to her bad deeds. The women go on to say that George should marry someone else. This conversation deepens Annie's sadness, leaving her feeling even more depressed. When they arrive home, George notices that Ani looks sad. He asks her why, but she remains silent. Still, he understands that it's because they don't have a child. While checking his letters, George comes across one from his friend, Dr. Matthews, who is conducting research to develop an instant antivenom for snake bites. Dr. Matthews is coming to George's town to continue his research. Dr. Matthews tries to persuade his mother Anima to accompany him, but she refuses. Instead, she asks him to visit Verichin, the person who covered all the expenses of his education. Verichin and his second wife, Thresyama, are discussing Matthews. Verichin expresses his desire for Matthews to marry his daughter, Gracie. Thresyama, Gracie's stepmother, dislikes the idea of Matthews marrying Gracie. She begins plotting to create a rift between Verichin and Matthews. Gracie and Matthews are having a conversation, expressing their love for each other. When Matthews arrives home, his mother asks if he met Verichin. When he replies that he didn't, she becomes unhappy. George returns home from his office feeling unwell. He tells Ani that he has experienced this before. Ani urges George to see a doctor, but he insists that he will consult Dr. Matthews when he arrives. Matthews' mother meets Verichin, who was a close friend of Matthews' late father. They discuss the wedding plans for Matthews and Gracie. Verichin gives Matthews some money to support his research. After they leave, Thresyama expresses her dissatisfaction with this decision. Maria and Kurion are servants in George's house. Matthews is preparing for his journey, packing up his belongings. George's health is worsening, and Ani insists that he see a doctor immediately. However, George receives a letter informing him that Matthews will be arriving the next day. So, he decides to wait and consult Dr. Matthews instead. George and Ani go to the railway station to receive Matthews. After exchanging pleasantries, Matthews casually asks how many children they have, which creates an uncomfortable silence. They all arrive at George's house. Matthews asks George if he can arrange a helper for him. In response, George assigns Maria's husband, Toma, to assist him. Matthews mentions that he loves flowers. George and Ani visit the place where Matthews runs his clinic and research center. During their visit, George talks about his illness, and Matthews examines him. Matthews assures George that by next Christmas, he will be completely fine. Toma joins Matthews as his helper. Matthews' mother receives a letter from him, and Gracie reads it. However, she feels unhappy because he didn't ask about her or write to her separately. Matthews visited George at home and gave him an examination. Then, Ani offered Matthews coffee. While they were having coffee, Maria showed up with her baby. Such a beautiful smile, Matthews remarked, gazing at the baby. It's sure to draw everyone in. George overheard Matthews' compliment to the baby, but he thinks that Matthews is giving this compliment to Ani. A flicker of suspicion crossed his mind, and a seed of doubt began to grow. Matthews conveyed a desire for sweets, while simultaneously stating he was full. Matthews gave George the medical advice of bed rest and no smoking, before his leaving. Verichin received a letter from Matthews stating that his wedding to Gracie could take place before the following Christmas. The letter also included a request for financial assistance. Thresyama's warnings against sending money to Matthews were disregarded by Verichin. As Thresyama tried to decipher the contents of Matthews' letter to Gracie, Verichin intervened, scolding her and accusing her of being ill-mannered. George witnessed Ani arranging sweets for Matthews and then directing Kurion to collect some flowers from the garden to give to Matthews. This action made him feel irritated. Matthews made another visit to George. Ani discussed George's health with Matthews, mentioning that George's temperament had shifted, making him more easily angered. Matthews reassured her that this was a consequence of his medical issues. From his room, George attempted to eavesdrop on Ani and Matthews' discussion. His doubts about Ani intensified as he listened. George drifted into a troubled sleep, his mind conjuring a romantic scenario between Ani and Matthews. George began to mutter in his sleep. Drawn by the sound of his voice, Ani came to check on him. Ani asked Maria if she would allow her to keep the child for the night, but Maria said she would not be able to have a good night's sleep without her child. Annie's mood dampened, and she then told Maria to leave with her child. George knew Annie's sadness surrounding her inability to have a child, and this knowledge caused him to become tense, leading him to smoke. George's health declined rapidly. Ani, frustrated with his smoking, scolded him and ordered Kurion to retrieve medicine from Dr. Matthews' clinic without delay. Kurion secured the medication and, while leaving, was stopped by Toma. Toma asked if anything was wrong, and Kurion stated he had a headache. Toma, acting foolishly, coerced Kurion into taking sleeping pills, falsely claiming they were headache medication. The continued decline of George's health coupled with Kurion's absence made Ani feel uneasy. She asked Maria to go and check on Kurion. Maria located Kurion, slumbering outside the clinic. Matthews was deeply engrossed in his research, conducting experiments involving snake venom on animals. However, his attempts consistently yielded unsuccessful results. Completely consumed by his scientific pursuits, Matthews disregarded his personal connections. He failed to acknowledge the letters from Gracie and his mother. A shared concern about a potential accident involving Matthews brought Gracie and his mother together. Gracie explained to Matthews' mother that Verichin believed he had been betrayed by Matthews. She also said that Thresiyama was trying to make Verichin give Gracie in marriage to someone else, and requested that Matthews' mother talk to Verichin about it. Thresiyama insisted that Verichin disregard Matthews and give Gracie in marriage to her relative. As this was happening, Matthews' mother reached their doorstep. He showed his annoyance to Matthews' mother. He then gave her a deadline of 2 days for Matthews to come and see him, or he would marry Gracie to another person. Matthews' mother attempted to reason with Verichin, but he remained firm in his decision. Matthews, focused on his tasks, told his assistant to keep him isolated for 2 hours. The assistant then directed Toma to guard the door and deny entry to everyone. George, harboring suspicions about Dr. Matthews' nighttime activities with Ani, brought home a dangerous dog, planning to use it to catch him. Ani was filled with fear upon seeing the dog. Thomas prevented Verichin from seeing Matthews, which deeply offended Verichin. He then stated that he was from Matthews' birthplace and had supported Matthews' journey to becoming a physician. The assistant interrupted Matthews' work to tell him someone from his hometown was waiting. Matthews, not knowing it was Verichin, told the assistant to keep him from being disturbed. The words he heard from Matthews caused Verichin to feel utterly betrayed, and he left in a state of fury. Matthews persevered with his research, and finally achieved a breakthrough. He successfully developed an antivenom capable of saving lives from snakebites, filling him with immense joy. Matthews, now free from his research, arrived home and met his mother and Gracie. As Verichin was out of town, Gracie asked Matthews to stay and wait. However, he had to return that day. Upon arriving at George's house, Matthews discovered that George was refusing his medicine and behaving childishly. Matthews tried to convince George to take care of himself. George, in turn, began to make veiled, insulting comments aimed at Matthews and Ani. George overheard the discussion between Ani and Matthews. Thresiyama dispatched her servant to intercept the letters from Matthews to Gracie and Anima, retrieving them from the postman. Matthews grew concerned over the lack of letters from Anima and Gracie. Matthews' antivenom proved its efficacy by saving a nearly deceased individual, and the miraculous event was published in the newspaper. The news of Matthews' antivenom raised doubts among some doctors, who then decided to dispute his claims. After meeting with Matthews, Ani shared the details of their conversation with George. George became displeased that she had gone to Matthews' clinic, and his mind was now filled with suspicion. He spoke to Ani with biting words, making her cry. She asked him through her tears what was troubling him. Gracie composed a letter for Matthews and asked the servant to mail it, but the servant gave it to Thresiyama, who then destroyed it. George's dog lunged at Kurion, who quickly climbed a tree to avoid it. Ani was awakened by the disturbance and went to see what was happening. George also woke up and, looking out, said that it was Matthews. Ani, failing to grasp George's suspicion, innocently remarked that Dr. Matthews wouldn't arrive so late. Gracie, knowing she had to do something, made the decision to run away at night to locate Matthews. Morning revealed Gracie's disappearance. Verichin promptly initiated a search, starting his inquiries with Anima. Anima did not know where Gracie had gone. The people, assuming she had died by suicide, started looking for her in the nearby lake. Finding a piece of her cloth, Verichin became convinced that Gracie had died by suicide. He placed the blame for her death squarely on Matthews. Thresiyama remarked that there was no use in blaming the doctor, and unexpectedly stated she didn't hate him. She even went so far as to say she'd approve of him marrying her sister's daughter. Verichin, finally understanding Thresiyama's underlying agenda, reacted with sudden aggression and attacked her. Fueled by rage, Verichin grabbed a pistol and stormed out, determined to kill Dr. Matthews. During her search for Matthews, Gracie saw advertisements regarding the public challenge to his invention. Informing George about the challenge to Matthews' invention, Ani was met with disinterest. She then asked George to go to church with her for Christmas night service. Ani went to Matthews and asked if they could go to church. Matthews then delivered the happy news that George was now perfectly well. Overjoyed, Ani rushed home and shared the news with Maria that George was well again. However, Maria responded by bursting into tears. Maria, through her tears, explained that George had angrily left with his pistol. This information heightened Annie's existing worries about his mental health, and she quickly went to search for him. George reached Matthews' clinic, intending to murder him. Matthews, oblivious to George's intent, inquired about Ani. This sent George into a rage, and he hurled his pistol at Matthews, telling him to kill him. George started scolding Matthews harshly, while Matthews had no idea why. George accused Matthews of breaking their bond and taking Ani for himself. Matthews, angered by George's words, told him to stop speaking. He then stated firmly that Ani was not the kind of woman George was implying. All of this was a product of George's overactive imagination. George insisted that although Ani might be innocent, Matthews had lured her into a trap. Matthews firmly stated that Ani was not someone who could be trapped and that she was wholly committed to George. George dismissed Matthews' claims, determined to uphold his own narrative of an affair between Ani and Matthews. Matthews again tries to explain the truth to George. Then through the window he sees Ani coming to the clinic. Matthews tried once more to reason with George, but his words were interrupted when he saw Ani walking towards the clinic through the window. George grabbed the pistol, intending to kill Ani. Matthews stopped him, pleading for a few minutes. He then convinced George to enter the adjacent room and close the door. Watching through the keyhole, George saw Ani enter and ask if George had been to the clinic. Matthews announced that George had committed suicide, and Ani reacted with stunned disbelief. Matthews explained that it was a manifestation of George's illness. Ani countered, stating that the doctor had declared George cured. Matthews said these things happen sometimes, and that she should not cry. He then told her she should be happy that a sick husband had died. Matthews continued, saying that Ani was still young and beautiful, and he desired to marry her. He emphasized his success as a doctor, promising a happy life. Ani, in a fit of fury, confronted Matthews, accusing him of trying to take advantage of her situation. Ani made it clear that her kindness was a reflection of her loyalty to her husband, not any personal interest in Matthews. She says, he had no understanding of her love for George, and he shouldn't for a moment believe she would ever be his. George, listening from the room, heard Ani place the blame for his suicide on Matthews. George, overcome by the emotions he heard, stepped out of the room. Ani was dumbfounded to see him alive. Overwhelmed by the emotional turmoil, Ani fled the scene. George, filled with remorse, apologized to Matthews for his unfounded accusations and misgivings. Matthews, understanding the situation, urged George to seek forgiveness from Ani as well. Realizing the gravity of his actions, George immediately set off in pursuit of Ani. Ani reached home, overcome with emotion, and broke down in tears. George followed her and gently tried to comfort her. With Matthews nowhere to be seen, the doctors at the challenge location began to taunt him, concluding he had avoided the confrontation. When it seemed like everyone was leaving, Matthews arrived and apologized to the crowd for being late. Matthews detailed the process of creating his antivenom and announced that he would prove its worth by administering it to a human volunteer. Despite Matthews' plea, no one stepped forward to volunteer for the injection. The challenge was at an impasse, as those associated with the clinic were prohibited from participating. Matthews was on the verge of being mocked by the crowd. Verichin arrived at the clinic and proceeded to destroy everything he could find. Matthews, tense and worried, waited for a volunteer. Suddenly, Gracie arrived on the scene. Comprehending the situation, Gracie offered herself as a volunteer to uphold Matthews' reputation. Without a moment's hesitation, she allowed the snake to bite her. Matthews swiftly administered his antivenom. Gracie regained consciousness, and the crowd applauded, recognizing Matthews' achievement. The atmosphere was filled with celebratory joy as people congratulated Matthews. Verichin arrived, still intent on revenge, and attempted to shoot Matthews. However, George intervened, saving Matthews' life. Verichin then accused Matthews of being responsible for Gracie's death. His rage was quickly replaced with surprise upon seeing Gracie. He embraced her tightly. Anima also arrived and, with heartfelt gratitude, hugged Matthews. Ani and George exited the church on Christmas night, and were met by Matthews and Gracie. A feeling of shared happiness filled the air. With festive steps, Kurion and Toma danced in front of the church, wishing everyone a Merry Christmas.